Welcome back, everybody. And as we jump into today's training, as a business owner, one of the most important jobs every day that you have is to reach out, to be able to touch, move, inspire, and most importantly, convert your ideal client. And typically, we try to do this by sometimes utilizing conventional rhetoric, right? Which is basically persuasion based on fancy techniques, facts, PowerPoints, slides, statistics, all that fun stuff. And while none of this is innately bad, it is fundamentally just not how we're supposed to persuade for the most part, right? Because persuasion can occur one of two ways. And you get to pick which way you'd like to employ in your conversations, in your videos, in your writings, your social posts, right? And the ways that is it's either logical or emotional. And when you know you have the ability to solve someone else's problem and you see your ideal client and you're like, I can help you. I've been there. I know what you need. Take my hand. Trust me. I'll show you the way. Right? It can be easy to try to argue them into working with you by convincing them with the facts and the statistics based on what you've learned. But the problem with that is that they have their own experiences, their own beliefs, their own facts, their own evidence. Right? So when we do this, sometimes that other person may be listening to you, but there is a good chance they're really filtering that through all of their experiences, through all of their past, through all of the things they've been through. And sometimes the way that they'll hear that, in a way, it can be like you're arguing with them in their head. And that's the last thing that we want to do, right? Because let's just pretend for a second that you're an incredible persuasion expert, right? And you know everything that you need to do to be able to come alongside somebody and convince them to be able to work with you, right? Well, once you've done this, sometimes what you've done is you've connected with them on an intellectual basis. And sometimes that's just not enough because people are not inspired to act by reason alone. Not to mention, they can just be persuaded away from believing you in 5 minutes later from their Uncle Carl or their next door neighbor, right? Uncle Carl. But most importantly, it brings us to the power of persuasion in a different form. And that is to take an idea and marry it with an emotion. We do this through the power of a story. And in a story, you can still present information in the telling, but most importantly, you're engaging your customers' emotions, right? Because you're helping them let their walls down. A story is an invitation. You're not convincing them, and you're not arguing with them. You're not making them wrong. You're simply offering a different approach, a new way to see things. And when you have your own personal story to share, the beautiful part about that is nobody can argue with that, right? Because it's your own life experience. It's everything that you've been through, and it's everything that you've been able to accomplish and create. And no one can argue with your results. So your story illuminates the path and paints a vision that things could get better for them too. I remember when I first started getting into coaching and into business, and I actually started having success in my business, and people started reaching out to me to show them how to get the results that I was getting. And I remember when I first started to coach people, and they were new, and they were getting started. And I would tell them, you need to take action, right? Don't get stuck on the outcome. And that, when I would tell them that, it fell flat. They wouldn't take the action. And especially when it came to phone calls, when I started training people on how to do sales calls and how to get up and running. And I remember finally, after beating my head against the wall for so long of telling people, don't get stuck, take action, right? Don't worry about the outcome. Finally, I was like, there's a better way to do this. And the way that I determined that I actually came up with was, I'm going to tell them my story about my first phone call. So now I want to tell you about my first phone call because I remember that day like it was yesterday. I remember walking into my mentor's office and he was sitting at the desk, he was ready, he had all his papers in front of him. And I remember sitting down and going, okay, what are we going to learn today? What are we going to learn? And my mentor looked at me and he said, today we're going to do phone calls. And as soon as he said that, I was like, what are we doing today? And he said, today we're going to do phone calls. And I remember I was panicking inside. And I was like, okay, yes, today we're going to do phone calls. And I built up the courage, I built up the strength, and I was like, okay, I got my phone out. I had my script in front of me, and I was like, I had never made a phone call before, so I was panicking. And I remember making that phone call. I remember dialing it, and I got this lady on the phone, and as I started to talk, my voice was cracking. I was sweating. I was squirming in my seat, and I started to talk to her, and it was awkward. It was bad, all right? And to say that she knew that I was new would have been an understatement. I got about halfway through that phone call, and you want to know what she heard? She heard this, because I'm reading the script. I'm fumbling through. She can hear the paper. It's not one of my better moments, okay? And I remember I got about halfway through that call, and she asked me a question that I didn't know the answer to. And as soon as she asked me that question, I didn't know the answer. You know what I did in that moment was I told her, oh, hang on a second. And I put her on hold. And then I asked my mentor what the answer to that question was. And then I got back on the phone and I told her the answer to that question. And I handled it so smoothly. It was amazing. You should have been there. Oh, no, that's not what I did. You want to know what I did in that moment? She asked me that question and I froze. I panicked. And I literally sat there and I looked at my phone and I looked at my phone. And then finally, you want to know what I did? Is I reached over and I hung up on her. And when I hung up on her, I put the phone down and then I celebrated and I went, yeah, baby, I hung up on her. She didn't hang up on me. Victory. That's not what I did. In that moment, I did hang up on her. But as soon as I hung up on her, I put the phone down and I was devastated. And my mind kicked in. Loser, failure, you're never gonna do this. You're never gonna make it happen. You don't know anything about business. You don't know how to do this. And my mind started beating me up so bad. Truth be told, in that moment, I wanted to quit. And thankfully, I had my mentor sitting there with me. And we started talking about it. And we started really looking at it. And this was something that I learned in that moment that still stays with me to this day. Is I was basing my worth and my value on whether or not I successfully handled that phone call perfectly. And I got that person to agree with me. And I got the sale at the end of the phone call, right? And what I had to learn in that moment was that I learned to find my value and my worth in the action and not the result. That every day, no matter what result I saw, I was going to cast a vote with every action that I took for the person I was going to become. And that story, as I told these people that were new and getting up and running in making phone calls and doing sales calls, once I told them that story about my first phone call, that story invited them into accepting that belief for themselves, because a truth discovered is infinitely more powerful than a truth delivered. And as I shared that story with them, they were able to discover that truth for themselves. That taking the action is valuable. Taking the action does get them a step closer. Taking the action is progress, right? Like, I love the community that we have here, right? Is a culture of progress, not perfection. So today, we want to give you this tool. the gift and the power of storytelling so you can influence and persuade effectively and change people's lives that you're destined to change. So, with that being said, let's dive into how to tell stories that inspire, stories that connect, and stories that prime your people for your teaching and to receive your message. All right, so number one, the importance of storytelling. Okay, first off, this is a foundational skill. This is a skill that you will use in every area of your life, in every area of your business, whether you're doing a social post, whether you're doing a webinar, whether you're writing a book, right? This is your ebook. You'll use this in every single aspect of your life, okay? So I love this because it is truly a foundational skill, all right? The second thing is you will use it in story, teach, tool, okay? You wanna make sure that you hone in on that, or you'll also use it in hook, story, call to action. All right, and number three, in this video, I'm gonna show you how to tell your stories that inspire, that help to connect, and help to prime your people for your teaching. Okay, so first off, let's talk structure. All right, when it comes to stories, there's 3 points that will structure a powerful ability to deliver your story. Okay, so first, number one is intention. Okay, the story has a point. All right, you want to make sure, first off, that your story either has an intention or that your story has a point, right? Like, how many of you have ever been listening to someone and as they start to tell you the story, they start to tell you their life story and they start going down this path and then they go down this path and then they're over here and then they're over there and finally you're like, what's the point of this story? Where are you even going with this? Please stop. I get it, right? So you want to make sure that your story has a point, okay? The second thing that you want to do is you want to make sure that there's a body, right? A body to your story, right? That details and helps to build out the evidence for your point, okay? So how do you do this effectively? Through emotion, right? What were you feeling in that moment? What were you thinking in that moment? The other thing that you want to make sure that you're doing while you're telling a story is you want to utilize your voice tone. If you were excited, you don't want to sit there and say, I was really excited in this moment. It was a big moment. Like I was so pumped up, it was unbelievable, right? No, you need to relive it yourself. Go back through it, experience it, feel that excitement, feel that energy, right? Or if it's on the opposite side of that, right? And you were struggling and it was a hard time and it was a challenge. Be okay with letting yourself feel that while you're telling the story because that communicates so loudly, right? I love the saying that says, don't tell me, show me. And we communicate so much through our body language, all right? And one of the ways that you can do that helped me to start to tell a powerful story is take them into the room with you. All right, when you were walking into that room, what happened? Or when you were experiencing that, what was going on? How were you feeling? What did you hear? All right, what were the things that you were seeing in that? But tell them what it felt like from the first person perspective. All right, and lastly, number 3 here is you want a compelling conclusion, right? There is a clear before and after, right? An epiphany moment. A moment of decision where life has never been the same again from that moment forward, all right? So you wanna make sure that you bring it around, that you put a nice bow on it, and that you give them that epiphany or that moment that you learned something that moved your life forever, all right? So real quick, to recap, number 1, a story must have an intention or a point. Number 2, you wanna make sure that you're using details that build evidence, all right? And number 3, you want a compelling conclusion where you can see a clear before and after, right? That epiphany moment. So let's transition into how you can look for the epiphany moments in your life. They will be life experiences that can be turned into stories where people can watch you grow, moments where they say, I felt that same way. Or maybe it's moments where they're like, man, I'm going through that right now. You're going to want to share those moments. You want to take them into those moments with you so that they can really relate, so that they can really hear that through me too. I've been there. And the other thing you're going to want to share with them is what did you discover in those moments? How did it impact you? How can you change your story and to really specifically speak to them where they're at in that moment, right? To really speak to the purpose or the outcomes that you're wanting to achieve in those moments, right? And what I love about this is you can take the same stories that you're telling, but really be able to tweak them to accomplish different outcomes. Like, for example, I could take that same story of my first phone call, right? And I can really tweak that into going, hey, not only did I find my value and my worth in that, but the other thing that I realized is the importance of having a coach in your corner and having someone to push you to take uncomfortable action, right? Because that was something that by taking that action, my life was never the same again. But it was that mentorship that pushed me to uncomfortable places where that growth occurred. And the point is to look for what your audience needs and extract those truths from the moments that you have lived through so they can benefit from them. So what do you think? You think you're ready for this? You think you're ready to get started and start telling stories? Awesome, because now it's your turn. Think back to your irresistible product framework, right? Think back to your ideal audience, their ideal outcome, and what you've already achieved that they want. And identify 2 or 3 stories that were turning points in your life, right? Your epiphany moments. And remember, they don't have to be huge stories. They can be small moments, right? Ordinary days where you experience something that shifted your trajectory. Often, these moments can be more relatable because they're like, I go through that same thing all the time, or I just went through that. And just a quick note before we go on. Your people are out there and they want to connect with you. And your stories are going to be invitations to pull them a little closer and build trust with them as you establish your authority. So let your stories build the bridge to working with the people who need you most. They want and need to hear your story and learn what you have to share. And as you start to brainstorm ideas, remember, stories that have shaped you into who you are today are the stories that will help to shape them into who they're going to become tomorrow. All right, so start collecting them. That's the other thing is you're going through life and you're going through everyday moments and you just learn something and you're like, oh, I just learned that. Grab that. I promise. There's so many moments that I'm like, oh, I should have wrote that down. It was such a learning moment for me. So what I highly recommend is start collecting stories in a Google Doc or a spreadsheet or a journal. I have a journal that's just a story journal. And every time I'm going through life, every time something happens to me, I'm like, oh, that was a great point. That was a great learning lesson. And this is a beautiful story that will help to relay that message, all right? Write down trigger words, what the point of the story is, and write down anything that will help you to remember that story for next time. This is how I was feeling. This is what I was going through. This is really the emotion. This is the point, right? The more detailed you can be, the better it'll help you to go in and tell that story in the future, okay? So this is how you will hone in on your storytelling skills and be able to connect to others with authenticity, with vulnerability, with passion, and most importantly, with impact. And remember, as you begin to tell your stories, find the value in the action and not the result. This is a muscle you will build over time, and the result is so worth it. And if you need any additional insights on this, make sure to go in and check out the Tony Robbins collection. There's a training in there called Design a Talk That Influences that will blow your mind. So make sure that you utilize all the resources you have, and we'll look forward to seeing you guys at the next training.